She saved a dying Lakota child and found love with his father after she lost her baby. Sarah Mitchell sat in the empty nursery, staring at the pale yellow walls she had painted just 3 months earlier. The room was supposed to be filled with the sounds of a crying baby by now, but instead it was silent, too silent. She had spent weeks choosing the perfect crib, the softest blankets, the sweetest little outfits with tiny buttons and soft fabrics. Now those clothes sat folded in drawers that would never be opened, and the crib stood empty like a monument to dreams that had shattered. It had been 6 weeks since she lost her baby girl at 7 months. The doctors called it a late-term miscarriage, using clinical words that felt cold and distant. They explained medical reasons, chromosomal abnormalities, things beyond anyone's control, but Sarah didn't want explanations. She wanted her daughter. She had felt her moving, hiccuping, responding to her voice. She had already chosen a name, Emma Rose. For 7 months, Emma had been real, alive, a little person growing inside her. And then, in one terrible day at the hospital, she was gone. The grief was like drowning. Some days Sarah could barely get out of bed. She would wake up and for just a moment forget what had happened, and then the memory would crash over her like a wave, pulling her under. She stopped going to her job at Denver Children's Hospital, where she had worked as a pediatric nurse for 8 years. Her supervisor was understanding, giving her leave, telling her to take all the time she needed, but Sarah knew she couldn't go back to that place where she had once felt so much purpose. How could she care for other people's children when she couldn't save her own? Her husband, Michael, tried to be supportive at first. He held her when she cried, brought her tea, sat beside her in silence. But Michael grieved differently. He wanted to pack up the nursery immediately, to move forward, to try again someday. He said things like, "We're still young, and we can have other children," as if Emma could simply be replaced like a broken dish. Sarah knew he meant well, but his words felt like knives. Every time he suggested putting away the baby clothes or talked about the future, the distance between them grew wider. By the 3rd month after the loss, they were barely speaking. Michael threw himself into his work as an architect, staying late at the office, taking business trips that seemed to last longer each time. When he was home, he retreated to his study or the gym, anywhere that wasn't near Sarah. She knew he was hurting too, but she felt abandoned when she needed him most. The man she had married, the man she had planned to build a family with, felt like a stranger. One evening in late October, Michael came home with Chinese takeout and a nervous expression. They sat at the kitchen table, the food growing cold between them as he spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone crossing a frozen lake. He said he needed space. He said they both needed time to heal separately before they could help each other. He said he had already talked to a lawyer about a legal separation, not a divorce necessarily, just some time apart. Sarah listened with a numbness that had become familiar. She didn't cry or argue. Part of her had seen this coming. Part of her felt relieved that at least now the pretending could stop. Michael moved out the following weekend, taking his clothes, his books, his guitar he never played anymore. The house felt even emptier after he left, but it also felt honest. Sarah was alone with her grief now, no longer trying to hide it or manage someone else's discomfort with it. She spent days wandering from room to room, unable to focus on anything, unable to imagine what came next. Her best friend Rachel visited often, bringing groceries and forcing Sarah to eat. Rachel, a social worker with infinite patience, didn't try to fix anything or offer empty comfort. She just sat with Sarah, let her talk about Emma, looked at the ultrasound pictures Sarah kept in her wallet. One afternoon, Rachel mentioned that her organization was desperately trying to fill temporary nursing positions at various clinics, serving underprivileged communities. There was an opening at a small clinic on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. It was far away, in the middle of nowhere, serving a population with limited health care access. It would be challenging work, possibly the hardest she'd ever done. Something stirred in Sarah for the first time in months. Far away sounded good. Challenging sounded better than empty. She asked Rachel for more information. The position was for 6 months, covering for a nurse who was on extended medical leave. The clinic served several Lakota communities on and around the reservation, an area where poverty rates were high and medical resources were scarce. The work would be demanding, the pay modest, the living conditions basic. Sarah would stay in a small apartment attached to the clinic. Most patients would have little money and complex health needs from years of inadequate care. It was not a glamorous opportunity. But as Sarah read through the details Rachel provided, she felt something she hadn't felt since losing Emma. Purpose. She applied that evening. Within a week, she had a phone interview with Dr. Margaret Whitehorse, the doctor who ran the clinic. Whitehorse was direct, asking tough questions about whether Sarah could handle the isolation, the poverty, the cultural differences. Sarah answered honestly. She said she was looking for a way to be useful again, to help children who needed her. She didn't hide that she was going through a separation, that she had recently experienced a profound loss. Dr. Whitehorse was quiet for a long moment, then said that sometimes the people who have lost the most have the most to give. She offered Sarah the position. 3 weeks later, Sarah packed her practical clothes, her medical references, and one small framed photo of her ultrasound into her reliable Honda. She left the key to the house with Rachel, gave her forwarding information to her lawyer, and sent Michael a brief text letting him know she was leaving Denver for a while. He responded with a simple, "Take care of yourself," which made her sad, but also confirmed she was making the right choice. Whatever they had been was over, at least for now. The drive to South Dakota took 2 full days. Sarah drove through the mountains of Colorado, across the plains of Wyoming, into the rolling grasslands of South Dakota. The landscape grew emptier, wider, more open. The sky seemed enormous out here, stretching forever in all directions. As she drove, Sarah felt like she was shedding layers of her old life, leaving behind the person she had been, though she had no idea yet who she might become. She arrived at Pine Ridge on a gray November afternoon when the wind was bitter and relentless. The reservation stretched across a vast area with scattered houses, dirt roads, and a landscape that felt both beautiful and harsh. The clinic was a low, simple building, painted white with a red roof, sitting beside a modest apartment that would be her home. Dr. Whitehorse met her outside, a woman in her 60s with long gray hair, weathered skin, and eyes that seemed to see right through people. She showed Sarah the apartment, 1 bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom, living area with a space heater, and the clinic facilities. Everything was clean but warm, functional but basic. That first night, Sarah lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the wind howl across the plains. She felt completely alone, thousands of miles from anything familiar. She thought about Emma, about Michael, about the life that had fallen apart. She let herself cry, something she still did every day. But beneath the grief there was something new, a tiny spark of possibility. She didn't know what would happen here. She didn't know if running away from her pain was brave or cowardly, but she was here now, and in the morning there would be patients who needed her help. For tonight that was enough. Sarah fell asleep to the sound of the wind, clutching the ultrasound photo, carrying all her broken pieces to a place where maybe, somehow, she could begin to find a reason to put them back together. Sarah's first few days at the clinic passed in a blur of new faces, new routines, and learning the rhythms of this unfamiliar place. The patients came steadily, many driving long distances over rough roads to reach the only medical facility for miles. She treated elderly women with diabetes, teenagers with sports injuries, babies with ear infections, men with work-related wounds. Each person carried stories of hardship, of making do with little, of waiting too long to seek help because gas money was tight or work couldn't be missed. Sarah threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction, for the simple clarity of medical problems that had solutions. Dr. Whitehorse worked beside her, a steady presence who wasted no words but noticed everything. She taught Sarah about the specific health challenges facing the community, about the historical trauma that affected people's relationship with healthcare, about the importance of building trust. Sarah listened and learned, trying to understand this world so different from the gleaming hospital in Denver where she had worked before. On her 6th morning at the clinic, Sarah was restocking supplies in the exam room when she heard the outer door burst open. The sound was urgent, desperate. She rushed to the waiting area and saw a man stumbling in, carrying a small child wrapped in blankets. The man's face was tight with fear, his hands trembling. The child in his arms was frighteningly still. Dr. Whitehorse emerged from her office immediately, her calm exterior cracking just slightly. She gestured toward the exam room and the man followed, laying the child gently on the examination table. Sarah could see now it was a little boy, maybe 5 years old. His skin burning hot, his breathing rapid and shallow, his lips tinged with blue. His father unwrapped him with shaking hands, revealing a thin body drenched in sweat. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Whitehorse asked, already listening to the boy's chest with her stethoscope, her face grave. 3 days he's had fever, the man said, his voice breaking. "I thought it was just a cold. I gave him medicine from the store, but last night he got worse, much worse. This morning he wouldn't wake up properly. I drove as fast as I could." Sarah moved automatically into nurse mode, checking the boy's vital signs, noting his dangerously high fever, his rapid heartbeat, his labored breathing. His oxygen levels were far too low. She looked into his half-open eyes and saw a child barely holding on. Whitehorse's examination was quick and thorough. "Severe pneumonia?" she said quietly to Sarah. "Both lungs. And look here." She pointed to old scars on the boy's chest. He's had respiratory problems before. His lungs are compromised. He needs a hospital, intensive care, IV antibiotics, oxygen support. We don't have the equipment here. The father, hearing this, made a sound like a wounded animal. Please, he whispered. Please, he's all I have. His mother died 2 years ago. He's all I have left. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. She looked at this little boy, fighting for every breath, and saw all the children she couldn't save. Saw Emma. Saw every loss that mattered. But this child was still alive, still fighting. There was still time. We need to call for emergency medical transport, Sarah said firmly. Right now. The next hour moved both impossibly fast and terribly slow. Dr. Whitehorse made the calls while Sarah started an IV line in the boy's small arm, administered oxygen through a mask, gave him fever reducers, and a first dose of antibiotics to buy time. The father hovered nearby, his hands clenched, whispering words Sarah didn't understand but knew were prayers. She learned his name was James Runsfast, and his son was Tommy. The medical helicopter would take 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes felt like forever when a child was this sick. Sarah stayed beside Tommy, monitoring every breath, adjusting the oxygen, talking to him softly even though he barely seemed aware of her presence. She told him he was strong, that help was coming, that he needed to keep fighting. She held his hot little hand and willed her own strength into him. James stood on Tommy's other side, tears running down his face. I should have brought him sooner, he said, his voice thick with guilt. I couldn't afford to miss work. I thought it would get better. I should have known. Sarah looked up at him, this father carrying the weight of impossible choices. You brought him now, she said gently. You got him here. That's what matters. When the helicopter landed in the field beside the clinic, the crew moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah gave them a rapid briefing on Tommy's condition, the treatments she'd started, his vital signs. They loaded him onto a stretcher, started additional lines, prepared for transport. James looked lost, unsure if he could go, how he would get there, whether he even had the right. I'm coming with you, Sarah announced, surprising herself. She looked at Dr. Whitehorse, who nodded once, understanding. Go, the doctor said. I'll manage here. That child needs advocacy, and his father needs support. Sarah climbed into the helicopter beside Tommy's stretcher, with James strapping in across from her. As they lifted off, she kept her hand on Tommy's wrist, feeling his pulse, counting his breaths, watching the monitors. The flight to the regional hospital in Rapid City would take 30 minutes. The whole way, maintaining her calm, professional voice while inside she was praying to anyone who might listen that this child would make it. James sat rigid, his eyes never leaving his son, his lips moving in what Sarah recognized as continuous prayer. She caught his eye once and tried to give him a reassuring look, though she knew the next hours would be critical. Tommy's condition was severe. Even with the hospital's resources, recovery wasn't guaranteed. They landed on the hospital roof, and Tommy was rushed into the pediatric intensive care unit. The doctors there took over immediately, surrounding Tommy with equipment and expertise that the small clinic could never provide. Sarah stayed, giving detailed information to the medical team, making sure they understood Tommy's history, advocating for aggressive treatment. She knew how hospitals worked, knew how to push for what a patient needed, knew the right questions to ask. James was directed to a waiting area, but Sarah saw the panic in his eyes at being separated from his son. She spoke to the charge nurse, pulled some strings based on her professional credentials, and got permission for James to stay nearby. She showed him to a small room where he could see Tommy through a window, where he wouldn't be completely cut off from his child. The first day and night were touch and go. Tommy's pneumonia was more advanced than they'd initially thought. His weakened lungs struggled to absorb oxygen even with the ventilator helping him breathe. The medical team worked constantly, adjusting medications, monitoring his response, watching for complications. Sarah, though technically just a visitor, found herself unable to leave. She stayed in her scrubs, catching brief moments of rest in a chair, checking on Tommy whenever she could, bringing updates to James. James barely moved from his vigil. A hospital social worker brought him food he didn't eat, offered him a place to shower that he refused. He just sat, watching his son through the window, his face carved from stone, aging years and hours. Sarah sat with him during the long night, not saying much, just being present. She understood that sometimes silence was the only comfort possible. On the second day, Tommy showed the first signs of improvement. His fever began to come down. His oxygen levels stabilized slightly. The doctors allowed themselves cautious optimism. By the third day, He opened his eyes briefly, seemingly aware of his surroundings for the first time. When he saw his father through the window, he made a small movement with his hand. James broke down then, his shoulders shaking with sobs of relief. Sarah put her hand on his arm, her own eyes filling with tears. This child was going to survive. Against the odds, with help that came just in time, Tommy Runs Fast was going to live. Sarah watched James hold his son's hand through the bed rail once he was allowed in the room, watched Tommy's small fingers curl around his father's larger ones, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. Purpose. Connection, the sense that she had done something that mattered. She had helped save this child. She had been there when she was needed most. As Tommy drifted into a more peaceful sleep, truly resting now rather than unconscious, Sarah stepped out into the hospital hallway. She leaned against the wall, exhausted, but awake in a way she hadn't been since losing Emma. She couldn't save her own daughter, but she had helped save someone else's son. It didn't erase her loss. Nothing would. But it reminded her that she still had something to give, that her training and experience and care still mattered, that maybe broken people could still do important things. Tommy was discharged from the hospital after 10 days, still weak but recovering steadily. The doctors gave James a long list of instructions, medications to administer, warning signs to watch for, and a schedule of follow-up appointments. James listened carefully, nodding at everything, but Sarah could see the worry in his eyes. She knew what he was thinking because she had seen it countless times in her nursing career. The medical instructions were clear, but the reality of following them was complicated when money was tight, when the nearest pharmacy was an hour away, when missing work meant not making rent. Before they left the hospital, Sarah approached James in the hallway. "I'd like to do home visits," she said. "To check on Tommy, make sure he's healing properly, help with the medication schedule. It's part of my job at the clinic anyway, following up with patients who've had serious illnesses." James looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with something else. Maybe pride. Maybe hesitation about accepting more help. "You've already done so much," he said quietly. "You saved his life. You didn't have to stay at the hospital all those days." "I wanted to," Sarah said, and realized it was completely true. "Tommy's a fighter. I'd like to see him fully recover." James finally nodded. "Okay, thank you. We live about 20 minutes from the clinic, out past the old mission church. I'll write down directions." 3 days later, Sarah made her first visit to their home. She followed James's hand-drawn map down a dirt road that turned into barely more than 2 tracks through the grass, past scattered houses and open prairie, until she reached a small wooden house painted faded blue. It sat alone on a gentle rise, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. The house was modest, probably just a few rooms, but it was well maintained. Someone had built a neat fence around a small yard, and there were flower boxes under the windows, empty now in November, but showing signs of care. James met her at the door, looking surprised that she'd actually come. Tommy was lying on a worn couch in the living room, wrapped in blankets, watching an old television that played cartoons through fuzzy reception. When he saw Sarah, his eyes lit up with recognition. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice still weak but excited. "Dad said you might come, but I didn't know if you really would." Sarah felt her heart squeeze. She sat down beside the couch and checked Tommy's vital signs, listening to his lungs, checking his temperature, asking him questions about how he felt. His lungs still sounded congested, but much better than before. His fever was gone. He was pale and thin, but there was life in his eyes now, curiosity and energy trying to break through the exhaustion. The house was sparse, but clean. Sarah could see the living room and kitchen from where she sat, one space flowing into the other. There was a wood stove for heat, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, shelves with a few books and family photos. She noticed a picture of a beautiful woman with long dark hair holding a baby Tommy, both of them laughing. James's late wife, she assumed. The image made her chest ache with recognition of loss. James brought her coffee and they went over Tommy's medications together. Sarah noticed he had them all organized in a careful system, with notes about times and doses. He was clearly trying hard to follow every instruction perfectly. She showed him some easier ways to track everything, left him printed schedules, and made sure he understood what symptoms would require immediate attention. "The doctor said his lungs were damaged from before," James said quietly, glancing at Tommy to make sure he was absorbed in his cartoons. "From when he was 2. He got really sick that winter and we didn't get him to a hospital fast enough. My wife was still alive then, but she was already sick herself and we didn't have a car that ran well, and by the time we got help his lungs had scarring. The doctor said he'd always be more vulnerable to respiratory infections. The guilt in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah recognized it because she carried her own guilt, the irrational but persistent feeling that she should have somehow prevented her own loss. "You did the best you could with what you had," Sarah said gently. "That's all any parent can do, and you got him help this time. That's what saved him." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah visited 3 more times. Each visit, Tommy was a little stronger, a little more energetic. He started asking her questions, curious about everything. Where did she come from? What was the city like? Did she have kids? That last question made her pause, the familiar grief rising up, but Tommy's innocent face made it easier somehow to answer. "I almost had a little girl," she told him honestly, "but she died before she was born, so no, I don't have children." Tommy thought about this seriously. "That's sad," he said with the straightforward honesty of a child, "but you're really good at taking care of kids. You took good care of me." Sarah had to look away, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Tommy. That means a lot to me." James, overhearing this exchange, looked at Sarah with new understanding. Later, as she was preparing to leave, he walked her out to her car. The winter afternoon was cold and clear, the sun low on the horizon painting the prairie gold. "I'm sorry about your daughter," he said, "and I'm sorry Tommy asked about it. He doesn't understand yet how some questions can hurt." "It's okay," Sarah said. "Actually, it felt good to talk about her. Most people avoid mentioning it, like if they don't bring it up, I won't think about it. But I think about her every day anyway." James nodded slowly. "It's the same with my wife, Marie. People stop saying her name after a while, like she never existed. But I want Tommy to remember her. I want to talk about her." They stood there in the cold, 2 people who understood loss, and something shifted between them. A recognition, a connection built on shared grief and survival. "How long has it been?" Sarah asked. 2 years and 4 months, James said. "Cancer. By the time they caught it, it was too late. She fought hard, but..." He trailed off, looking out at the prairie. "Some battles you can't win." Sarah visited more frequently after that. Officially, she was monitoring Tommy's recovery, but the visits became about more than medical care. She brought books for Tommy, taught him card games, helped him with reading practice when he felt well enough. James always made coffee, and they would talk while Tommy played or rested. James told her about his work as a carpenter, how he traveled around the reservation fixing houses, building furniture, doing whatever construction work he could find. He showed her a rocking chair he was making, the wood smooth and beautiful under his skilled hands. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits in a way that surprised her. The house felt warm despite its simplicity, filled with something she'd been missing. Tommy's laughter, even when he was tired, was like medicine. James's quiet presence was steadying. "I would be so happy..." She started bringing groceries with her, casually mentioning she'd bought too much or that Dr. Whitehorse had given her extras. James accepted these offerings with dignity, knowing what she was doing, but grateful nonetheless. One afternoon, she arrived to find Tommy much more energetic, dancing around the living room to music playing on an old radio. "Miss Sarah, watch this." He showed her a spinning move he'd learned, his thin arms stretched wide, his face glowing with joy at feeling well again. James watched from the kitchen doorway, a rare full smile on his face. "He's back," he said to Sarah. "My boy is really back." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind this time. "He is. He's doing so well." That evening, as she was leaving, Tommy hugged her tightly. "Will you come back soon?" he asked. "Not just for doctor stuff, but just to visit?" Sarah looked at James, who gave a small nod. "I'd love to," she said, "if that's okay." "It's more than okay," James said. As December arrived, Sarah's visits became part of her weekly routine. Sometimes she brought medical supplies or helped Tommy with breathing exercises to strengthen his lungs. But increasingly, she just came as a friend. She helped Tommy with homework when school started again. She drank coffee with James and learned about Lakota traditions, listening to stories about his childhood, his parents, the history of his people. He taught her words in Lakota, laughing gently when she mispronounced them. The reservation community began to notice. Other patients at the clinic mentioned seeing her car at the Runs Fast place. Dr. Whitehorse raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just watched Sarah with those seeing eyes. Some people smiled and seemed approving. Others whispered, wondering what the white nurse was doing, spending so much time out there, whether it was appropriate, whether James was being foolish, getting close to an outsider who would inevitably leave. Sarah heard some of the whispers, but she didn't stop visiting. Being with Tommy and James felt right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. She found herself laughing more, sleeping better, feeling less hollow. The grief over Emma was still there, always would be, but it had shifted somehow. Instead of drowning her, it existed alongside something new growing in her life. One snowy evening, Sarah stayed later than usual, helping James cook dinner when Tommy requested she eat with them. They made simple food, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, but sitting around the small table felt significant, like a family. The thought scared her and comforted her in equal measure. After dinner, Tommy fell asleep on the couch, exhausted but healthy, his breathing deep and easy. James covered him with a blanket and then sat with Sarah at the kitchen table, both of them nursing cups of tea. "Can I ask you something?" James said quietly. "Of course. Why did you really come out here?" "To the reservation, I mean." "Whitehorse said you were running from something, but that you seemed like someone who needed to help people." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, considering how to answer. Finally, she decided on the truth. "I lost my baby, and then my marriage fell apart. I felt like I'd failed at the most important thing, becoming a mother. I needed to get away from my old life and find something meaningful again. I needed to save someone, I think, since I couldn't save my own daughter." James was quiet for a long moment. "And did you? Find something meaningful?" Sarah looked at Tommy, sleeping peacefully, then at James's kind, weathered face. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I did." As winter deepened over the reservation, Sarah's life settled into a rhythm she hadn't expected but found herself cherishing. The clinic kept her busy during the days, but her evenings and weekends increasingly revolved around Tommy and James. What had started as medical follow-up visits had transformed into something much more personal. She couldn't deny it anymore, even to herself. She was falling in love, not just with James, but with the life they were building together, the sense of belonging she felt in their small home. Tommy had fully recovered, his lungs strong again, his energy boundless. He had grown attached to Sarah in a way that both warmed and frightened her. He called her Miss Sarah, but sometimes when he was tired or excited, he'd start to say Mom before catching himself, looking embarrassed. Sarah never corrected him or made him feel bad about it. She understood the confusion. She was acting like a mother to him, loving him like one. And children knew these things in their hearts before adults were ready to name them. James had become someone she thought about constantly. His quiet strength, the way he listened when she talked, his gentle humor that emerged once he felt comfortable. He'd started opening up more about his life, his late wife Marie, his struggles and hopes. They spent long evenings talking after Tommy went to bed, sharing stories, learning each other's histories. James told her about growing up on the reservation, about keeping cultural traditions alive, about the challenges his people faced. Sarah told him about her childhood in Denver, her parents who'd passed away years ago, her dreams of having a big family that now felt complicated and uncertain. One Saturday in January, James invited Sarah to a community gathering at the tribal center. It was a winter feast, a traditional event with food, dancing, and storytelling. Sarah hesitated, aware that she would be one of the few non-native people there, uncertain if she belonged. But James assured her she was welcome, that he wanted her there, that it was important to him that she understand his culture and community. The tribal center was warm and crowded when they arrived. Long tables held dishes Sarah had never seen before, traditional foods alongside more familiar fare. The air hummed with conversation in English and Lakota, with laughter and the sound of drums beginning in the corner where musicians were setting up. Tommy ran off immediately to play with other children, leaving Sarah and James standing together, her hand tucked into his arm. People greeted James warmly, and their eyes lingered on Sarah with curiosity. Some smiled and welcomed her kindly. Others were more reserved, their expressions neutral, taking her measure. James introduced her simply as Sarah, a nurse from the clinic, a friend. But the way he looked at her, the way he stayed close beside her, told a different story that everyone could read. An elderly woman with long white braids approached them, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "James runs fast. It's good to see you here with someone," she said in accented English. "Marie would not want you alone forever." She turned to Sarah, studying her face with ancient eyes that seemed to see everything. "You are the one who saved little Tommy. The whole community knows. You have a good heart." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the acceptance in the woman's voice. "Thank you. Tommy is very special to me." The evening passed in a blur of new experiences. Sarah tried foods she couldn't name, listened to stories told in Lakota with James quietly translating key parts, watched traditional dances that moved her deeply with their beauty and significance. Tommy danced with the other children, his face shining with joy and pride in his heritage. She felt James's hand find hers in the darkness as they watched, their fingers intertwining naturally. But not everyone was welcoming. Sarah overheard two women talking near the food table, their voices carrying more than they probably intended. "Another white person thinking they can save us," one said. "She'll leave, just like they all do. And James will be hurt again, and that poor boy will lose another mother figure." The word stung because Sarah had the same fears. What was she doing? Her temporary position at the clinic was supposed to end in a few months. She had a life back in Denver, or what was left of one. Her divorce wasn't even finalized yet. Was she being foolish, getting so deeply involved with James and Tommy when everything was still so uncertain? That night, after dropping them home, Sarah sat in her small apartment staring at her phone. There was a message from Michael sent earlier that day. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot. I made a mistake. We made mistakes. But we can fix this. Come home. We can try again, maybe even try for another baby when you're ready. I miss you. I miss us." She read the message 3 times, her emotions tangled. This was what she'd wanted months ago when Michael first left, wasn't it? For him to realize he'd given up too easily, to fight for their marriage, to want to try again. But now, sitting in this small room on a reservation in South Dakota, thinking about James's quiet smile and Tommy's bright laughter, Michael's message felt like it was from another lifetime, another person's story. She didn't respond. Not yet. She needed to think. The next week brought more complications. Dr. Whitehorse called Sarah into her office one morning, her expression serious. "The nurse you're covering for has decided not to come back. Her health issues are more severe than expected. The clinic needs a permanent nurse. I'd like to offer you the position, Sarah. You've done excellent work here. The community is warming to you, and frankly, we need someone dedicated. But I also know this wasn't your plan. You came here to escape, to heal. I need you to think carefully about whether staying is running away from your real life or running toward a new one." Sarah sat in the chair across from Dr. Whitehorse, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. A permanent position meant committing to this place, this life. It meant acknowledging that what she felt for James and Tommy was real and worth pursuing. It meant accepting that she might never return to her old life in Denver, that she was choosing a completely different path than the one she'd imagined. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Sarah asked. "Of course. Take a few weeks. But I'll need an answer by the end of the month." That evening, Sarah visited James and Tommy as usual, but she was quiet, distracted. Tommy noticed immediately, asking if she felt sick, if something was wrong. She assured him she was fine, just tired. But James saw through it. After Tommy went to bed, they sat at the kitchen table, and James waited patiently for her to speak. Finally, Sarah told him everything. About Michael's message, about the job offer, about her confusion over what she should do. James listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. "I don't want to presume anything about what's happening between us," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I need to be honest. I have feelings for you, James. Real feelings. And I love Tommy like he's my own son. But I'm scared. I'm scared I'm using you both as a way to avoid dealing with my grief. I'm scared the community will never fully accept me. I'm scared I'll make the wrong choice and regret it forever." James reached across the table and took her hands in his. His palms were rough from carpentry work, warm and steady. "I have feelings for you too, Sarah. I think you know that. But I'm scared too. I'm scared of betraying Marie's memory by moving on. I'm scared of what it means to bring someone into Tommy's life who might leave. I'm scared of asking you to give up your whole world for us when we might not be enough." They sat there in the dim kitchen light, holding hands across the table, 2 broken people trying to figure out if their broken pieces could fit together into something whole. "Marie died because we couldn't get her the right treatment fast enough," James said quietly. "The cancer spread while we were waiting for appointments, driving hours to specialists, dealing with insurance that barely covered anything. I watched her suffer and fade, knowing that if we lived somewhere else, somewhere with better access to health care, she might have had a chance. I've carried that guilt for 2 years. And then Tommy got sick, and I almost lost him the same way, through delay and poverty and lack of access. But you saved him. You fought for him in that hospital like a warrior. You've been fighting for this whole community since you got here, treating people with respect and skill, not judging us for our circumstances." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "So I'm not going to tell you what to do, Sarah? I can't. This has to be your choice, made for your own reasons. But I can tell you this, if you stay, it won't be easy. You'll face prejudice from some people who don't trust outsiders. You'll struggle with the poverty and the limited resources and the weight of needs you can't fully meet. But you'll also have a community that needs you, work that matters deeply, and 2 people who love you very much." Sarah's breath caught. "You love me?" James smiled, sad and hopeful at once. Yes, I didn't want to. I fought it. I felt guilty about it. But yes, I love you. And Tommy loves you. You've brought light back into our home, into our lives. But that can't be the only reason you stay. You have to want this life for yourself, not just for us. Sarah drove back to her apartment with tears streaming down her face, her heart and mind at war. She thought about Michael, about the life they'd planned, about whether she owed it to that past self to try again. She thought about Emma, about whether finding happiness here meant letting go of her daughter or honoring her by living fully. She thought about James's words, about Tommy's trusting face, about the patients at the clinic who needed her skills and compassion. That night, she pulled out her laptop and typed an email to her lawyer, asking about the status of her divorce. Then she opened a new message to Michael. She typed and deleted several versions before settling on simple honesty. Michael, I appreciate you reaching out, but I don't think coming back is right for either of us. We both need to move forward separately. I hope you find happiness. I'm starting to find mine. She didn't send the email immediately. She let it sit in her drafts folder, knowing that sending it would be a point of no return. Instead, she looked at the ultrasound photo of Emma that she still kept on her nightstand. I don't know what to do, she whispered to the image. Help me know what's right. The answer didn't come in words, but in a feeling, a gentle settling in her heart. Emma would want her to live, to love again, to be happy. Loss didn't mean stopping. It meant carrying love forward into whatever came next. Sarah sent the email to Michael. Then she sat down and started thinking seriously about what staying would mean, making lists of practicalities, of fears and hopes, of all the reasons to go and all the reasons to stay. By morning, she still didn't have her final answer, but she was getting closer to finding it. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of Sarah's life, not because anything bad happened, but because she was wrestling with a decision that would determine her entire future. She continued working at the clinic, continued visiting James and Tommy, but there was an unspoken tension hanging over everything. Everyone was waiting for her answer, though only Dr. Whitehorse had actually asked the question. February arrived with brutal cold and heavy snows that made the dirt roads nearly impassable. Sarah found herself snowed in at the clinic one weekend, unable to make it to James and Tommy's house for their usual Saturday visit. She called to check on them, and Tommy's disappointed voice nearly broke her heart. "But you promised to help me with my reading project," he said, his voice small and sad. "I know, sweetie. I'm so sorry. The roads are too dangerous right now. But I'll come as soon as they're clear, I promise." After she hung up, Sarah stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the snowfall in thick curtains across the prairie. She thought about how this weather would have been just an inconvenience in Denver, where snowplows ran constantly, and she lived minutes from everything she needed. Here it was isolating, sometimes dangerous, a reminder of how harsh this life could be. But she also thought about how beautiful it was, the endless white landscape, the profound quiet, the way the community pulled together during hard weather, checking on elders, sharing supplies. There was something real here, something authentic that her comfortable city life had lacked. By Monday, the roads were passable again. Sarah drove carefully to James's house after her clinic shift, her car sliding occasionally on icy patches. When she arrived, Tommy burst out the door despite the cold, running to hug her before she even got out of the car. "I missed you so much," he said, squeezing her tight. "It was only 2 days, but it felt like forever." Inside, James had made a simple dinner of stew and fry bread. They ate together, Tommy chattering about school and his friends, the easy conversation of a family. After dinner, Sarah helped Tommy with his reading project while James washed dishes. It was domestic and ordinary and perfect. Later, after Tommy was asleep, James built up the fire in the wood stove, and they sat together on the old couch, closer than they'd sat before. Sarah found herself leaning against his shoulder, fitting there naturally, his arm coming around her to hold her close. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said quietly. "I finalized my divorce last week. Michael and I are officially done." James was silent for a moment, then asked gently, "How do you feel about that?" "Sad for what we lost, but also relieved. We weren't right for each other anymore, maybe never were in the way that matters for a lifetime. We wanted different things, dealt with grief in ways that pushed us apart instead of bringing us together." She paused, gathering courage. "I think I needed to let that go before I could fully embrace what's here, what's possible." James tightened his arm around her. "And what do you think is possible?" Sarah sat up so she could look at him directly. "That depends on you too, James. I know how I feel, but I need to know if this is real for you, if you can really see a future with me, because I'm trying to decide whether to stay permanently, and that decision involves you and Tommy, whether you like it or not." James cupped her face gently with his calloused hand. "Sarah, I told you I love you. I meant it. I can absolutely see a future with you. You've become essential to our lives, to Tommy's happiness, to my own. But—" He hesitated, his eyes troubled. "But what?" Sarah prompted, her heart racing. "But I need to know you're not staying just because of us. I need to know you want this life for yourself, the work at the clinic, the community, all of it. Because there will be hard times. Times when the poverty and the needs overwhelm you. Times when you'll miss the city, your old friends, the conveniences you gave up. Times when some people will make you feel like you don't belong. I need to know you're strong enough to weather those times, that you won't wake up one day and resent us for tying you to this place." Sarah considered his words carefully. "I won't lie and say I'm not scared. I am. This is so different from anything I imagined for my life. But you know what? The life I imagined fell apart. Maybe that happened for a reason. Maybe I needed to be broken open to find what I was actually meant for." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I love working at the clinic. I love feeling like my skills matter, like I'm making a real difference in people's lives. I love the pace here, the connection to the land, the sense of community even when it's complicated. And yes, I love you and Tommy more than I thought I could love anyone. But I also need this for me, to prove to myself that I can build something new from the ruins of what I lost." James searched her face, his dark eyes intense. "Marie would have liked you," he said softly. "She always said I needed someone strong, someone who could match my stubbornness. She made me promise, before she died, that I wouldn't stay alone forever, that I'd let Tommy have a mother again when the time was right. I didn't think I could keep that promise. But then you showed up, fighting like hell to save my son, bringing life back into our home." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I've been carrying guilt about falling for you, feeling like I was betraying her. But I think she'd be happy. I think she'd approve of you." "I hope so," Sarah whispered. "I'll never try to replace her, James. I know she's Tommy's mother and always will be. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be another kind of mother to him, someone who loves him and helps raise him alongside her memory." James kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Sarah's first kiss since her separation from Michael, and it felt like coming home and starting fresh all at once. The next morning, Sarah walked into Dr. Whitehorse's office before the clinic opened. The older woman looked up from her paperwork, one eyebrow raised in question. "I want the permanent position," Sarah said firmly. "I want to stay." Dr. Whitehorse's stern face broke into a rare smile. "Good. The community needs you. And I think you need us too. There's more," Sarah continued. "James runs fast and I are together. Romantically, I mean. I need you to know that, in case it affects my position or if there are concerns about professional boundaries." Dr. Whitehorse waved a dismissive hand. "Tommy is no longer your patient in any official capacity. He's healthy, and you're his father's girlfriend. This is a small community, Sarah. People have relationships. As long as you maintain professional boundaries with your actual patients and don't show favoritism, there's no issue." She paused, her expression softening. "Besides, I've been watching this develop. You're good for each other. James hasn't smiled this much in years, and that boy glows when you're around." Over the next months, Sarah's life transformed in ways both subtle and profound. She moved into a slightly larger apartment in the small town near the reservation, officially making South Dakota her permanent home. She shipped her remaining belongings from Denver, sold the house she'd shared with Michael, and closed that chapter of her life completely. Her relationship with James deepened naturally, without rush but with steady certainty. She spent most evenings and weekends at their house, cooking meals together, helping Tommy with homework, falling into rhythms that felt ancient and right. James taught her about Lakota traditions, taking her to ceremonies and gatherings, introducing her to elders who shared stories and wisdom. Some community members remained skeptical of her, but many others welcomed her warmly, especially after word spread that she'd committed to staying long-term. Tommy started calling her Mom Sarah, without embarrassment, differentiating her from his birth mother, but giving her the title she'd earned through love and daily care. Sarah treasured it every time, the name she'd thought she'd never hear a child call her. In late spring, at a community gathering much like the one where she'd first felt uncertain of her place, an elder approached Sarah and James where they stood together watching Tommy play. The old man, whose wrinkled face held decades of wisdom, spoke to them in Lakota first, then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. "It's good to see you together," he said simply. "Love that crosses differences and is born from helping others is the strongest kind. You're building something good here." That night, as they drove home under a sky brilliant with stars, James pulled the truck over at a high point on the prairie. They got out, Sarah wrapping her jacket tighter against the cool spring air, and stood looking at the vast landscape stretching endlessly in all directions. "Marry me," James said suddenly, no preamble, just honest and direct. Sarah's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me. Not right away if you're not ready, but eventually. I want to build a life with you, officially, completely. I want Tommy to have stability, to know you're not going anywhere. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours." He turned to face her fully. "I know it's only been a few months since you decided to stay, but when you've lost as much as we both have, you learn not to waste time when you find something worth keeping." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time, joyful ones. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married 6 months later in a ceremony that honored both their backgrounds. There was a traditional Lakota ceremony first, conducted by an elder, with Sarah wearing a beautiful dress that community women had helped her make, adorned with beadwork and meaningful symbols. Tommy stood proud beside his father, wearing traditional clothing, his role in the ceremony carefully explained to him. Then they had a simple civil ceremony so their marriage would be legally recognized, with Dr. Whitehorse and several close friends from the community as witnesses. The celebration afterward was held at the tribal center with food and music and dancing, with people from the reservation and Sarah's few friends who'd traveled from Denver, mixing together in joyful chaos. Rachel was there, Sarah's oldest friend, crying happy tears and telling anyone who would listen that she'd known Sarah needed this journey, this transformation. 1 year after the wedding, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news brought complicated emotions, joy mixed with fear, hope tangled with memories of loss. James held her as she cried, understanding without words the complexity of what she felt. "This doesn't replace Emma," he said gently. "Nothing could. But it's okay to be happy about this baby while still missing her. Life isn't one or the other." The pregnancy was carefully monitored, with Sarah driving to specialists regularly, taking every precaution. The community supported her beautifully, with women sharing advice, bringing traditional medicines and prayers, treating her with the care afforded to mothers-to-be. Tommy was ecstatic about becoming a big brother, already planning all the things he'd teach the baby. In the spring, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Emma Marie, Emma for the daughter Sarah had lost, Marie for the mother Tommy had lost, a bridge honoring both the grief and the love that had brought them all together. As Sarah held her newborn daughter, with James beside her and Tommy carefully touching his sister's tiny hand, she thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the loss, the grief, the desperate drive across the country to escape her pain, the dying child she'd fought to save, the quiet man who'd taught her about resilience and second chances, the community that had slowly opened to embrace her. She'd come to this place broken, convinced she'd failed at the most important thing, but she'd found something she hadn't been looking for. A family built not from biology alone, but from choice and commitment, from showing up and staying even when things were hard, from loving people through their pain and letting them love her through hers. Sarah looked down at baby Emma's peaceful face, then at Tommy's proud smile, then at James's eyes shining with tears of joy. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It was infinitely better. It was real and hard and beautiful, built from ashes into something strong. She'd saved a dying child and found love with his father, but the truth was deeper than that simple story. They'd all saved each other, pulling one another from grief into a future none of them could have imagined, but all of them had needed desperately. And now, together, they were whole.